Hey, welcome to A Cartoonist Guide to the Bible. I'm Steve Thomason, and in this video, I am going to put the Gospel of Matthew in context for you. I'm going to put it in context with how it fits in the Bible, where it fits in the geography of the world and in time, and I'm going to give you the lay of the land and show you how we can organize Matthew in such a way to walk through it based on the five discourses. It's going to be awesome. Let's dive in. All right, we're going to look at the overview of Matthew, and we're going to start off with where does Matthew fit in the Bible itself? So we've got this collection of books called the Christian Scripture, and in this collection, I like to think of the Bible as like a bookshelf with a collection of different types of documents, and there's 5 shelves in the Christian Scripture. First of all, there's this collection of books called the Gospels, and these books, they paint a theological portrait of Jesus from 4 different perspectives. And then there is a book called the Acts of the Apostles. And this is the story of the very first generation of Jesus followers who are trying to make sense out of Jesus in light of the Greco-Roman world and how to tell the story of Jesus in their own context. And then those leaders write letters to the churches that they started. And the Apostle Paul wrote a bunch of letters, so he gets his own shelf. And then the other leaders wrote letters, and they're called the general letters. And then there's a final letter that's called the Revelation of Jesus Christ. And you put them all together, and it's called the Christian Scripture. And so the Gospel according to Matthew is the very first one of these books on the bookshelf. So now I want to look at how does Matthew fit in the world, the geography of Matthew. So first of all, let me get out my laser pointer here. This is the world at the time of the Bible. And now you see here in this highlighted section, here's something that's really interesting about the Bible, is that every single story that happens in Scripture takes place within the boundaries of this highlighted section of the world, which means it's not a story about the whole world. And the people in the Bible days, they were aware of these tribes up in the north that they called barbarians, and these tribes in the northern part of Africa. They were also aware of the people in India and in the far, far east called China. But for the Gospel of Matthew, there's 2 important cultures to keep in mind. First of all, there's the Roman Empire, because they are large and in charge at the time of Jesus. And the Roman Empire spanned all the way up here to the British Isles, to Spain, the northern coast of Africa, and then up into this region and up into Germania. So that's kind of the boundaries of the Roman Empire. But there's also the vestiges of the Persian Empire, which the Persians conquered the Babylonians, and the Babylonians were the ones who conquered Jerusalem and brought the people into their 70 years of exile. Now, this is important for a couple of reasons for the Gospel of Matthew, because in the very beginning of the story, we find that there are magi from the east. This is the east, and they come from there to Jerusalem and Bethlehem, where Jesus is. Speaking of Bethlehem and Jerusalem, right here, this tiny little section right in the middle is where the Jesus story takes place. So here's the basic geography of what people call the Holy Land, what today we call Israel. And let's talk about the water first, because the water is pretty important. This big body of water over here is called the Mediterranean Sea, or what the ancient world called the Great Sea. And then up here in the north is the Sea of Galilee. It's a freshwater lake. It has the Jordan River that flows down south, connecting it to the Dead Sea, where water just flows in, doesn't flow out. It's full of minerals, and it's pretty much dead. Now, there are 2 major geographical regions that are important for the Gospel of Matthew. Most of the story takes place up here in the northern region called Galilee. Now, Jesus grows up in this little town called Nazareth, and when he begins his ministry, he puts his headquarters right here in this fishing village on the shore of Sea of Galilee called Capernaum. Most of the story happens up here. Then, when the story gets super intense, Jesus goes south to the city of Jerusalem. Now, here's Bethlehem, which is where Jesus was born. And But the big event takes place right here in the city of Jerusalem. So there you go. That's the geography of the book of Matthew. So now we're going to walk through the story of Matthew using a cartoonist guide to Matthew. This is the graphic novel version of Matthew that I drew. Now, I took the 28 chapters of Matthew and I drew them in 21 graphic novel pages. Now, I want to make an observation about the story based on these pages. The story in the first 14 pages, so 2/3 of the story, takes place in the northern part of the country in Galilee. And the last third of the story happens in 1 week in the city of Jerusalem. So up here in the ministry in Galilee, that takes about 3 years or so. And then the final week is 1 week. So that just, there's an interesting observation. What's going on with how Matthew is telling that story? We've got Galilee, we've got Jerusalem. Okay, now I want to make another observation. Most scholars, as they study through the Gospel of Matthew, have made an observation that there are 5 particular types of literature, particular moments in the Gospel that they call discourses. There's 1, there's 2, there's 3, there's 4. 4 of them happen in the first 2/3, which is the ministry in Galilee. And then there's a 5th one that happens when Jesus is in Jerusalem. These are called the 5 Discourses of Matthew. Now, discourse is just a fancy word for talking. So these are sections where Jesus, where the author of Matthew collects Jesus' teachings on a particular topic. And so in chapters 5 through 7, it's called the ethical discourse, which is more commonly known as the Sermon on the Mount, where we hear the quintessential teaching of Jesus and the ethics of the kingdom of heaven. And then chapter 9 and 10, we see Jesus sending his disciples out into the countryside to do the things that Jesus has been doing, healing people, curing the sick, feeding the poor, casting out demons, proclaiming the message of the kingdom of heaven. That's the mission discourse. And then in chapter 13, we find the parables discourse, where we see that Jesus teaches in a very particular way. He teaches in parables, which are they're either quick and simple stories, but they're kind of hard to understand what he's talking about. And that's a particular way that Jesus liked to teach. And then the final discourse in the Galilee ministry is called the community discourse and found in chapter 18, where Jesus talks about this vision of what the community of the kingdom of heaven actually looks like. It's not built on power and wealth, but it's built on forgiveness and inclusion. And then when Jesus goes into the city of Jerusalem, there is a final discourse where Jesus talks about the coming of the end of the age. And he's really predicting the destruction of Jerusalem, which we know happened in the year 70, where after 4 years of war with the Empire of Rome, the Jewish people are crushed by the Roman Empire, and the temple is completely destroyed. And even to this day, it has not been rebuilt. Those are the 5 discourses of Matthew. Hey, thanks for watching this video. This is one in a series as I'm working through the Gospel of Matthew through a cartoonist guide to the Bible. Go to cartoonistbible.com/Matthew. Check out the links in the description. Share this, subscribe. Thanks for being part of this. We'll see you next time.